Welcome back to the Circuspreneur Podcast, where we dive into the business side of circus arts, performance, and the creative economy. I'm your host, Shanae Stiletto, and today we're going to talk about something that doesn't always make it into rehearsal spaces or behind the scenes conversations, but it should. Partnership agreements for circus duos and trios or band king acts. I've discussed this a bit on the Think Like an Acrobat series. And, this is something that I think is just so important and essential. And I've had a few things come up recently that made me want to do a whole new dedicated episode to circus partnerships and contracts in our industry because I think it does not get spoken about enough. Because let's face it, when you're flying through the air together, balancing each other's bodies, or putting your trust in a partner's hands, you want to make sure that trust extends beyond the stage. And, I can't really, bring that home enough. And this episode is going to be a little bit more structured for me. It'll kind of remind you of my Think Like an Acrobat series that I used to do, where I used to break down things in the industry on the biz side, kind of like point by point. And so I'm going to be pulling from my notes a lot more today because I want this to be a very straightforward episode where you get really helpful tips and not just fully just my opinion and kind of me going off into like a little tangent, which I usually like to do for the authenticity of this podcast because that's the energy that I like to bring. I want us all to feel like we're having a normal circus conversation and not something that's like overly produced. But circus is an art form built on collaboration and trust. Whether you're an acrobatic duo, an aerial trio, or a clown partnership, the success of your act depends on everyone pulling their weight. But here's the reality. Partnerships don't always last forever. People move on. Injuries happen. Creative visions change. Oh my. And sometimes business or money disputes can tear even the closest teams apart. Believe me, I know. That's why a partnership agreement is just as important as rigging checks or insurance coverage. It's your safety net for the business side of circus. I cannot stress that enough. So let's break it down. A good partnership agreement should cover roles and responsibilities, who's the flyer, who's the bass, and who handles bookings. Do you rotate roles like creative direction or social media management? You should write it down. Number 2, finances. How do you split income from gigs? Who pays for costumes, props, rehearsal space? Is there a shared account? Number 3, intellectual property. Who owns the choreography and act you create together? What happens if one person leaves? Can they perform the routine solo or does it stay with the group? And number 4, exit strategies. What if one partner wants to leave? Do they give 30 or 60 days notice? Do they get a buyout of costumes or equipment? Number 5, conflict resolution. Agree in advance on how to resolve disputes. Mediation or arbitration can save friendships and careers. Like, OMG. Here are a couple of scenarios that show why agreements matter. Imagine a duo creates a beautiful aerial silks routine. They get bookings all over the world, but one partner decides to leave the act and start working with a different flyer. Familiar? Without an agreement, who owns the act? Can they keep performing the exact same routine under a new name? Or think about a trio where one partner buys expensive props like a sear wheel or teeter board. If the trio breaks up, who keeps the equipment? A partnership agreement answers those questions before they become conflicts. And you should do it if you are listening to this and on the fence or in the middle of something that you think is not heading towards the most positive direction. And you can do this in the midst of a partnership agreement. But you should definitely do this prior to getting into one. No matter how close you are, no matter how long you've been around, please take my advice. Circus is both art and business. As artists, we focus on trust, artistry, and collaboration. But as business people, we need to protect our time, our money, and our creative work. A well written partnership agreement protects your friendship, protects your art, protects your future bookings. Think of it like a contractual rigging system. You wouldn't perform without checking your safety lines. Don't build a career without checking your business lines. So here's some takeaways. The big takeaways. If you're in a duo or trio, sit down and draft a partnership agreement right now. It doesn't have to be complicated. Start with roles, finances, and ownership of your act. And if things get serious, work with a lawyer who understands entertainment or performing arts law. Remember, protecting yourself legally doesn't kill creativity. It frees you to focus on the arts. So, everyone, this is one of those episodes that, I should do every week because with the state of where our industry and what it has become, previously, and this is me just waxing a little bit philosophical or however you want to put it, in the past, you would get with one partner in a resident show or, as a circus family, or even just a partnership that kind of came together naturally at a circus school or in some kind of, way that circus does. And you would just stay together for, 10, 15, 30, 40 years. There's just some really long lasting circus partnerships out there. And, that's what you would do. You guys would just stay together. Nowadays, it's not like that. You might have like 5 or 7 or 10 different partners in a year. And in sometimes those are very positive and successful exchanges. I'm not saying that they're all negative, right? It's just that is a lot of overlap and changeover within an environment that is still a business, right? You're signing a lot of contracts within that amount of time. There could be a lot of miscommunications. People's feelings change. People's feelings get very involved. Every single person is different. And that's why a contract protects you, right? When emotions break down, a contract is there as your safety net. And I cannot stress this enough. And this has been glaringly brought to my attention recently in a way that I felt like I needed to, again, dedicate an entire episode to it. And I could go, for a very long time. But I would stress that if you are on the fence again about doing this, don't be. You're not wrong for wanting to have stipulations that protect you, with your work. And it doesn't mean that there's not love there. It doesn't mean that there's not a lot of respect there. There doesn't mean that there's not a lot of, adoration there. And doesn't mean that you're not family. But it makes it so that you will be family after that contract. Because it will be that you still have your circus family intact, which for so many of us becomes the ultimate family and becomes more important than your blood family and those relationships that will again affect your livelihood for years to come, that you want to make sure that you are protecting that. And you also want to protect your reputation through having a partnership agreement, because unfortunately, sometimes when things break down or people do not treat you well, because again, partnerships can break down for a whole host of reasons. I have spoken very, intimately and delicately on my podcast, on a podcast episode long ago about, the very, unfortunately negative experiences I've had in partnerships where, there were, physical things that have happened, over the years where I was not treated well. And how that can happen, and how that unfortunately can be something that happens quite a bit in our industry that can go very unspoken. And sometimes you're not in the space or the powerful position to be able to protect yourself or defend yourself in those situations. And then people are able to get away with those things and go on and do other partnerships. And so that is why I wanted to speak to this. And if you never listened to my Me Too and Circus, I would highly suggest that you go back to that episode and listen to how I spoke about my experience in a very, I would say, poetic way. I spoke in a very poetic way, but it dealt with some very serious themes. In our industry that I have witnessed many, many, many times, or that I have heard of through others, and that I've also experienced myself, unfortunately. And I also counter that to say that I've had phenomenal interactions in the circus in partnership as well. And I have been in partnerships ever since I was very little as an acrobat, as a competitive acrobat. And so partnership to me is so sacred, and it's something that you have to do so well, because there is so much honor in how you treat someone that you work with, and that is depending on you for their safety and their livelihood, and the level of trust that should go into that, and the level of care is to me the focal point should be the focal point of every single partnership that you are in, no matter how casual it may be, because you can be in something like a regular relationship, which I, have discussed this on the Think Like an Acrobat series previously too, how you can go from being very casual with someone to being very serious with them in a span of something very, very quickly. You can get a really phenomenal offer within a casual circus duo, and now the stakes are super, super high. You didn't imagine that you would be seeing this person 5 days a week and doing 2 shows with them. And can your partnership sustain that without an agreement? I've seen some very tricky situations happen over the years, where had people had, I think, circus partnership agreements, they would have been able to come out of that less scathed on both sides, because it's not just about like blaming one person or another, even though sometimes it is very much one person's fault or a couple of people's fault, right? If they're acting shady, or if they are being abusive, or things like that, right? That are just like instant deal breakers. Like it's beyond a contract at this point. We're just completely severing ties. But in other situations, I've seen where partnerships, if they had had a partnership agreement prior to entering into a contract presented to them by a company, they would have made out much better in the future. Their partnership would have probably survived and flourished a lot longer. And, there's been, unfortunate cases where I've seen circus partnerships that, should still maybe even be around today, but companies and things like that got in the way and decided that they saw more value in that partnership being broken up than staying together. And I always want people to stay together. I'm that person. Like I said, I come from a background in sport where, you stay with that same partner for years, and you cultivate a bond, and, and a closeness. And again, there is a spoken respect and an unspoken respect. And I don't think that I can use that word enough, especially in talking about circus partnership agreements and how they can change the course of your career, I think. And again, how I do not think that we encourage those enough in the industry, and that we all, and I'm guilty of this too, like, oh, everything is cool, everything is fine. Like, these people mean me well. This person means me well. Like, like we've spoken about it several times. Doesn't seem like anyone's confused about what we've agreed upon here. And then things change. And suddenly someone's decided that they want to flip the script and they want to change things on you that again are not defined in a a binding contract between you both. It's maybe spoken, or at least nowadays we have text messages which again are admissible in court in some cases. If you need to say, I actually did say that, yes I did. So again, just this is to me, I think, the way where you don't have things end in needless drama or in tit for tats or in breakdowns of friendships, bonds, partnerships, family relationships. Because again, I have seen that too, in our industry in circus and in performing arts and entertainment, where families have to go at it because it's like you didn't think you needed a contract with your brother or your sibling or your sister or anything like that. Like all we do is a carry-in. Like why do we need that? But I think especially in this day and age where our industry is just so different and so multifaceted and things go so fast and contracts go so fast and exploiting feels so normal, I think at this point as well, where people have become very comfortable at exploiting talent and exploiting someone's skill or ability. And I think that you should remind yourself that you're not utilizing any partnership as a means to an end. Obviously, sometimes things are stepping stones and we're not going in the same direction at the same time or at the same pace. And that can be painful, but that can also be something that is just handled with a lot of care and a lot of grace and a lot of honesty. And I think, again, coming back to things that are legally protective is a very smart way to go in that. And I don't say this as someone who has done things perfectly well myself. That's why I think sometimes you can speak on things so well, because you learn so many difficult and challenging lessons yourself. And I always say this in the podcast that I would like for no one else to experience any hardship that I've experienced in the past or in the stories that I've heard of others that have suffered unnecessarily. I think I'm always saying as well that these are not perfect solutions, right? Some of these things can get kind of complicated and some of the things might seem great on paper, but living these are much more complex, especially in an environment that is so open to interpretation and certain things that can't necessarily be owned outright. But again, having defined work agreements, I think, is, definitely a tool that we should be using more in our industry so that we can save one another from the stressors of disagreements or of, again, misunderstandings that get taken too far, or things that get taken out of context, or or life transitions, things that just happen that bring us to different levels, and we have to, I think, have some guides. Our industry can be very like, we just make it up as we go, and so many of us, are used to existing in that as well as existing in some level of structure, of course, because contracts are our things. That's why I love discussing, gigging and negotiating your price and, making sure you know what clauses are in your contracts, and not waiting until your contract is expired, or your show ends unexpectedly and then suddenly you're looking and reading your contract for the first time. And those are painful realities that happen all the time and have happened all the time, and things that again leave us open to exploitation. I'm not saying that that is like targeted exploitation. It's just you exploit yourself because you didn't read something. You just didn't know, you just didn't realize, or you just don't realize how much power you have in a situation, right? Like you don't realize how much power you have to make decisions that could be better for you. And that could protect you more, protect your health, protect your money, which is so important in this industry, protect your integrity, and again, protecting your reputation and protecting what others know of you and protecting your ability to move forward with your work and with things that you've worked very hard on. And that goes again both ways. It's not just about respecting one person in the situation, it's about respecting everyone that's involved in the situation. And some of us handle respect better than others, and some of us handle business better than others, and some of us handle, our emotions better than others. Some of us handle being diplomatic better than others. And so let's, build on our strengths, but also, build, again, safety nets for our weaknesses and where we're not strong, because everyone has blind spots and you can't think of everything. I can't think of everything, but contracts exist for a reason. That's why companies keep making them more and more ironclad every single performance and show that you go into, because everyone just keeps on trying to outdo each other in terms of savviness. And, again, there's nothing wrong with that, but it definitely calls us all to be better and to be more attentive and to be more professional and to pay more attention to important matters and important language, and see again how much we can also protect ourselves as the performers and the entertainers and the artists that put ourselves out there and put ourselves on the line, and sometimes for others, day in and day out. And so we want to make sure that those commitments are preserved properly. So this was a special episode again. I'm your host, Shanae Stiletto. Thank you so much, Circuspreneurs, for tuning in. I'm just laughing so much because I really felt called today to put this out there and to make this episode. And I think, again, I'll be discussing even more on the interpersonal dynamics in the circus and partnering, and how important it is to, again, know your rights, define your rights, and have a healthy functioning partnership, because our industry is all about that, even if you're a solo performer. But definitely if you're in a partnership or you work with multiple people, you definitely know it's a different breed of performing than when you are a soloist. And as somebody who has done both, like myself, I've worked with, Band King, so many duos over the years, and then worked solo for many years as well. So, I've worn all those different hats and all those different dynamics, and have learned through all of them in so many different ways. So tune in to the next episode coming out soon, everyone. And until next time, please stay safe and stay healthy.